In September 2008, the United States government made a phone call to the heads of the world's largest banks. The message was simple. If you do not act by Monday morning, the global financial system will not open for business. Not slow down, not struggle, stop completely. Most people know 2008 as the year of the financial crisis. The year markets crashed, banks collapsed, and millions of people lost their homes and their savings. What most people do not know is what actually caused it. Who built the system that made it inevitable? And why not a single person responsible for it spent a day in prison? Today on Wealth Map, we are mapping the 2008 crash, the real sequence of events, the real architects, and the real lesson that the financial system quietly buried before anyone could learn it properly. Here is where most explanations of 2008 get it wrong. They start with greed, they end with greed, and they leave you with the impression that a few reckless bankers made bad decisions and the whole thing fell apart. That is not what happened. What happened in 2008 was not an accident caused by greed. It was the entirely predictable outcome of a system that was deliberately engineered to separate risk from consequence. Here is how it worked. A family in Ohio walks into a bank and takes out a mortgage to buy a house. They can barely afford the repayments. The bank knows this, but the bank does not care because the bank has no intention of holding that mortgage. Within weeks, that mortgage is sold to an investment bank on Wall Street. The investment bank bundles it together with thousands of other mortgages, good ones, bad ones, catastrophic ones, into a single financial product called a collateral as debt obligation, a CDO. That CDO is then sold to pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds around the world as a safe, high-yielding investment. The original bank in Ohio took the risk, then immediately passed it to someone else. That someone else packaged it, rebranded it, and sold it to people who had no idea what was inside it. The risk did not disappear. It was simply moved further and further from the people who created it, and closer to the people who could least afford to absorb it. But the story goes deeper, because someone was supposed to be watching. There are companies whose entire purpose is to look at financial products and tell the world how safe they are. They are called credit rating agencies. The three most powerful, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, effectively act as the gatekeepers of global financial trust. In 2006 and 2007, these agencies were giving the highest possible safety rating, AA to CDO stuffed with mortgage that were already defaulting. The reason is almost as simple to believe. The rating agencies were paid by the banks whose products they were rating, not by the investors buying those products, not by an independent government body, by the banks themselves. The same banks that needed those products rated highly to sell them. The same banks whose bonuses depended on those ratings being as high as possible. It was the equivalent of a restaurant paying the food safety inspector, who was examining its kitchen, and the inspector giving every kitchen a perfect score regardless of what was inside. This was not a secret. It was standard industry practice, documented, discussed openly at conferences, known by regulators. And yet it continued, right up until the moment the entire structure collapsed. By early 2007, the cracks were already visible to anyone paying attention. Mortgage default rates were climbing. The value of CDOs was quietly falling. Several small hedge funds had already begun betting against the entire system, placing financial wagers that it would collapse. The Federal Reserve had data showing the deterioration. The US Treasury had reports flagging the risk. Several economists had published detailed warnings years earlier. None of it produced action, because the system was working perfectly for the people running it. Banks were making record profits. Bonuses were at historic highs. The incentive to slow down did not exist for anyone with the power to do so. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers, one of the most powerful investment banks in the world with over $600 billion in assets, filed for bankruptcy. It was the largest bankruptcy filing in American history. The market did not just react, it froze. Within days, credit markets around the world stopped functioning. Businesses could not access the short-term loans they needed to meet payroll. The entire financial nervous system of the global economy seized simultaneously. What happened next revealed exactly who the system was truly built to protect. The United States government responded with one of the largest financial interventions in human history. Over $700 billion in taxpayer money was deployed to stabilize the banks that had caused the collapse. The institutions were saved, their shareholders were protected, their executives retained their bonuses. Meanwhile, over 10 million American families lost their homes. Unemployment doubled. Retirement savings built over decades were wiped out in weeks. And in countries that had never issued a single subprime mortgage, Iceland, Ireland, Greece, entire national economies were destroyed by the fallout from decisions made in buildings they had never set foot in. The people who built the system walked away. The people who trusted the system lost everything. And in the years that followed, not one senior executive from any of the major banks at the center of the crisis was convicted of a criminal offense related to the crash. Not one. The 2008 crash was not a natural disaster. It was not an unpredictable accident. It was the mathematically inevitable outcome of a system that rewarded risk-taking while ensuring that the consequences of that risk would always fall on someone else. The system has been reformed in certain ways since then, but the fundamental architecture, the separation of risk from consequence, remains largely intact. Understanding 2008 is not just financial history. It is a map of how power actually works, who gets protected, who gets sacrificed, and why the same patterns keep appearing decade after decade in different forms. This is Wealth Map. We do not just tell you what happened. We show you why it was always going to happen, and what it means for the world you are living in right now. If this gave you clarity that took others years to find, subscribe, because the next map we draw is one that changes how you see wealth forever.